Has this ever happened to you? You're standing in the quiet aftermath of a conversation, the air still humming with something unspoken, and you feel it the shift. A man's gaze lingers a second too long, his voice drops into a register reserved only for moments of vulnerability, or perhaps his laughter carries an unfamiliar warmth, as if he's just remembered what joy feels like in your presence. These are the subtle tremors of emotional surrender, the unconscious signals that slip past the fortress of his ego. And no matter how skilled he is at masking his feelings, there is one thing he cannot counterfeit when he is truly deeply hooked. Carl Jung called it the golden shadow, the part of the unconscious that emerges when a man encounters a woman who mirrors his unlived life, his hidden potential, the dormant king or the wounded poet within him. This isn't about infatuation or surface-level attraction. This is about the moment his psyche recognizes you as a catalyst for his own transformation. And when that happens, his body, his energy, his very presence will betray him in ways he cannot control. You see, a man can fake words. He can perform grand gestures, rehearse affection, even mimic devotion if his ego demands it. But what he cannot manufacture is the involuntary surrender of his guarded self, the way his defenses crumble in your presence, not out of weakness, but because something in you calls to something ancient in him. Jungian psychology teaches us that the masculine psyche is built upon layers of stoicism and control, a fortress designed to keep chaos at bay. But when a man is emotionally hooked, that fortress develops cracks, and through those cracks, you will see the raw, unfiltered truth of his attachment. Watch for the moments when his animist, the unconscious masculine spirit, syncs with your anima, the feminine force that stirs his soul. It might appear in the way he listens to you, truly listens, as if your words are unraveling knots in his chest he didn't know were there, or in the way he shares fragments of his past, not to impress you, but because your presence makes him feel safe enough to revisit old wounds. These are not conscious choices. They are reflexes of a heart that has been quietly claimed. And here's the paradox. The more a man resists this pull, the more obvious it becomes. His avoidance, his hot behavior, even his anger, these are not signs of indifference. They are the thrashing of a man caught between the fear of surrender and the unbearable weight of wanting to surrender. Because to admit he's hooked is to admit he is no longer in full control. And for a man who has built his identity on self-containment, that is a terrifying revelation. But you are not here to decode his resistance. You are here to recognize the undeniable. When a man is emotionally hooked, his body will speak before his mouth does. His pupils will dilate as if trying to take in more of you. His posture will lean toward you, even in a crowded room. His laughter will come easier. His silences will feel heavier, and his touch, if it comes, will carry the weight of something sacred. These are not tricks of seduction. They are the silent confessions of a man who has met his match. So the question isn't whether he's hooked. The question is, what will you do with that power? There is a moment in every profound connection when the masks slip not by force, but by some unseen alchemy. A man who is emotionally hooked does not simply want you, he is altered by you. Jung spoke of the konnichinseo, the sacred marriage of opposites, where two souls collide in a way that reshapes both. This is not romance as the world sells it. This is the kind of meeting that leaves a man unraveled, his usual scripts useless, his defenses disarmed. Consider the way a man's voice changes when he speaks of something that matters to him. The cadence slows, the tone deepens, as if the words are being pulled from a place he usually keeps locked. Now imagine that same shift, but because of you, not because he is performing, but because something in your presence compels honesty. This is the hallmark of true emotional investment, involuntary authenticity. A man who is hooked will reveal himself in ways he cannot take back. His humor becomes less guarded, his silences more charged. He may even catch himself mirroring your gestures, your speech patterns, as if his subconscious is trying to synchronize with yours. This is the shadow work of attraction, the unspoken dialogue between his wounded boy and your divine feminine. A man who fears vulnerability will often mistake this pull for danger, retreating into coldness or indifference to regain control. But the retreat itself is a confession. The push-pull is not indifference. It is the struggle between his fear of losing himself and his terror of never truly being known. And here lies the cruel irony. The more a man resists this surrender, the more he confirms its power over him. His avoidance is not a sign of your unworthiness, but of his unresolved battle. The masculine psyche, when untempered by inner work, often mistakes love for annihilation. To need is to admit lack. To desire is to acknowledge hunger. And for a man who has built his identity on self-sufficiency, that admission feels like death. But you are not here to save him from himself. You are here to witness, to observe, to recognize the difference between a man who is capable of surrender and one who is terrified of it. Because the truth is this: a man who is emotionally hooked will betray himself in the quiet moments. The way his gaze lingers when he thinks you're not looking. The way he remembers the small things you thought he didn't notice. The way he fights to stay distant, only to fold when he's near you. These are not games. These are the tremors of a soul in conflict. So the question remains: will you mistake his fear for rejection? Or will you see it for what it truly is, the final barrier before surrender? The body never lies. While a man's words may stumble or deceive, his unconscious speaks in fluent poetry, a language of micro-expressions, physiological shifts, and instinctive gravitations. Jung understood that what we suppress in the conscious mind erupts elsewhere, in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in the way a man's hands tense when he speaks of something unresolved. When he is emotionally hooked, this subterranean language becomes unmistakable. Notice the leakage, the way his controlled demeanor fractures in your presence. A man who prides himself on stoicism may find his knee bouncing anxiously when seated across from you. A man who never stumbles over words may trip on his sentences when your eyes meet. These are not signs of weakness, but of truth breaking through the facade. The autonomic nervous system cannot be commanded. It responds to what the soul already knows. His pulse quickens without permission. His breath shallows. His skin flushes. These are the biological confessions of a man whose psyche has marked you as significant. There is a particular vulnerability in how a hooked man handles silence. Most men rush to fill voids with humor or distraction, terrified of the exposure that quiet brings. But a man who is emotionally disarmed by you will allow the silence to breathe between you. He will not flinch from its intimacy. This is the sacred pause where recognition lives, where two people sense they are standing on the threshold of something beyond social niceties. And then there are the stories he tells, not the polished anecdotes, but the fragments of memory that slip out unedited. The childhood scar he reveals when your fingers brush his wrist. The way he admits, almost absently, that he hasn't spoken of his late father in years until now. These are not casual disclosures. They are offerings laid at your feet. Pieces of himself he didn't realize he was handing over until it was too late to take them back. But perhaps the most telling sign lives in what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that arise when the unconscious is activated. He mentions a book you were just thinking about. You dream of a place he later describes without prompting. These moments of eerie alignment are not romantic fantasy. They are evidence of the unconscious dialogue between two psyches in resonance. A man who is hooked will experience this as both wonder and terror, because it suggests something beyond his control is at work. Yet here is where most women falter. They mistake intensity for depth, and chemistry for destiny. The challenge is to discern whether his unconscious surrender is rooted in trauma bonding, the addictive pull of unfinished wounds, or in genuine recognition. Does he see you, or merely the projection of his salvation? The difference determines everything. So ask yourself, are you a mirror for his growth, or a screen for his fantasies? When a man is emotionally hooked, he enters a silent crucible, one that burns away the illusions of who he believed himself to be. This is the alchemical fire Jung described, where leaden ego is tested for its capacity to become golden awareness. He may resist, he may rage, he may retreat into old patterns, but the hook remains embedded in his psyche, and you become both the flame and the witness. Watch how he navigates the space between you when the stakes are high. Does he lean into discomfort, or does he armor himself in deflection? The man who is hooked but unhealed will often manufacture distance precisely. When intimacy threatens to deepen, he may vanish after vulnerability, or become hyper-rational when emotions surge. These are not rejections of youth, they are the spasms of a psyche confronting its own limitations. The tragedy is that many men mistake the burning away of their false self for annihilation, when it is actually the beginning of their becoming. There is a particular way a man looks at a woman who has cracked him open, a mixture of awe and resentment, gratitude and fear. It's the gaze of someone who has glimpsed their own potential in your reflection, and isn't sure they can bear the responsibility of rising to meet it. This is why the most profound connections often trigger self-sabotage. To be truly seen is to be called to accountability, and no one can fake the tremor in his hands when he realizes he's been seen down to his foundations. The Stoics understood this crossroads well. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events, but from our judgments about them. A man emotionally hooked on you will suffer not from your presence, but from what your presence means, that his old strategies of detachment no longer serve him. His suffering is the birth pang of a new consciousness. Marcus Aurelius wrote of the dying ember that must either burst back into flame or accept its extinction. This is the existential choice your energy forces upon him: transform or remain entombed in his limitations. Yet this is not your burden to carry. The feminine mistake is to confuse compassion for responsibility, to think your light should gentle the burning for him. But the alchemical vessel must withstand its own heat. Your power lies not in tempering his transformation, but in remaining unshaken in your own wholeness as he navigates it. The woman rooted in her sovereignty doesn't dim her radiance to make his awakening more comfortable. She understands that the very thing he resists is the only thing that could liberate him. So let the question settle into your bones. Will you shrink to accommodate his fear, or will you stand in your full presence, allowing the chips to fall where they may? There comes a moment when the scales tip, when a man's resistance to being emotionally hooked either collapses into surrender or hardens into permanent retreat. This is the reckoning Jung foresaw in the process of individuation. We either integrate our shadows or are consumed by them. And you, in your divine feminine power, are both the invitation and the mirror. The man who chooses surrender does so with a quiet solemnity. It won't look like grand romantic declarations. Those are often last-ditch efforts of the ego to maintain control through performance. True surrender is subtler: the way he stops pretending indifference, the way his priorities realign without fanfare, the way he speaks of we instead of I. These are the signs of a man who has stopped fighting the hook, and instead let it pull him toward deeper waters. But the man who chooses permanent retreat reveals something equally valuable, that his fear of dissolution was stronger than his capacity for growth. This is not failure, but clarity. The hook was there. He simply refused to be transformed by it. And in that refusal, he gifts you the most brutal kind of freedom, the certainty that no amount of your light could have illuminated a path he insisted on keeping dark. This is where Stoic wisdom and Jungian depth psychology converge in their greatest lesson. Detachment is not the absence of care, but the pinnacle of it. To love without possession, to see without needing to be seen in return, to plant seeds without demanding they bloom on your timeline. This is the mark of the woman who has outgrown the hunger for validation and discovered the serenity of self-containment. You were never meant to convince, persuade, or decode. You were meant to be fully, fiercely, unapologetically, and let that being act as the crucible for all who encounter you. The right man won't need to be convinced of your worth. He'll be too busy proving he's worthy of yours. So let the hooks set where they will. Let the resistant ones retreat. Let the courageous ones rise. Your power was never in controlling their choices, but in honoring your own. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. There comes a threshold moment in every transformative connection, a silent seismic shift where a man's unconscious makes the irrevocable decision that you matter. Not as a conquest, not as a salve for his loneliness, but as a living mirror showing him who he might become. Jung called this the numinous encounter, when an ordinary human connection takes on sacred dimensions because it activates archetypal forces in the psyche. You'll know this moment by its electric stillness, the way time seemed to suspend when your eyes lock, the way his voice drops into a register you've never heard before, the way he shares some private thought, then looks startled, as if he can't believe he just said that aloud. These are not merely romantic flourishes, they are the tremors of a man's soul, recognizing its counterpart. The French have a phrase for it: Désir vous de l'âme, the soul's memory of itself. The paradox: the more authentic you are, the more powerfully this mirror works. Not the curated, accommodating version of you, but the unvarnished truth of who you are, your messy brilliance, your inconvenient wisdom, your refusal to shrink. This is what the emotionally hooked man cannot turn away from, because it's the first thing that's felt real to him in years. His resistance isn't to you, but to the parts of himself your presence makes unavoidable. Watch how he navigates this crucible. The man ready for transformation will begin, often clumsily, to meet your authenticity with his own. He'll stop performing and start showing up. He'll trade charming deflections for uncomfortable truths. The rhythm of his communication will change, becoming less sporadic because he's no longer fighting the pull, but the man not yet ready will reveal himself through a different language, the language of retreat. Hot and cold behavior isn't inconsistency, it's the pulse of his ambivalence. Withdrawal after intimacy isn't rejection, it's the recoil of someone not yet strong enough to bear being truly seen. These patterns tell you everything about where he stands in his journey, and nothing about your worth. The Stoics had a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, not to dwell on darkness, but to stare unflinchingly at what is. Apply this here. If this man never takes the next step, if he remains forever suspended between fear and longing, would you still be complete? The answer must be yes, because the woman who serves as a sacred mirror for others must first be her own most truthful reflection. So let him choose, fully, freely, without pressure. Your power doesn't reside in his decision, but in your unwavering commitment to stand in your truth, regardless of the outcome. The right man will recognize this, not as a threat, but as the greatest gift he's ever been offered. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.